The rain tapped gently on the window panes of my small, tidy apartment, creating a rhythm that had always been soothing, a familiar companion to my solitary nights. Outside, the world was blurred by the gray drizzle, a watercolor painting in motion. Inside, the warm light from an antique lamp cast a comforting glow over the room, illuminating shelves lined with books and a few cherished photographs. My laptop hummed quietly on the wooden desk, its screen displaying an unremarkable stretch of the internet that had consumed many of my evenings. It was another typical night, one of those evenings where the mundane routine wrapped around me like a favorite blanket. I was browsing aimlessly, more out of habit than interest, when I stumbled upon an app that everyone seemed to be talking about. FaceApp. A few friends had shared hilarious transformations on social media, turning themselves into their opposite gender, or aging themselves decades into the future. The app promised a harmless bit of fun, a digital carnival mirror for the modern age. I downloaded it with the same casual intrigue that might prompt a person to pick up a glossy magazine in a waiting room. Setting up the app was straightforward, almost disappointingly simple. I sat back in my chair and allowed it to access my photo library. As I scrolled through images from birthdays, vacations, and candid moments, I selected a recent picture, a casual selfie taken during a weekend hike. The idea of seeing myself as someone else, as something else, was an itch of curiosity I suddenly felt compelled to scratch. The first transformation, a gender swap, was amusing, offering a glimpse of myself with softer features, longer hair, and an unfamiliar smile. I chuckled softly, the sound mingling with the patter of rain. There was something liberating about seeing one's face reimagined, an alternate identity sketched over familiar contours. Emboldened by this playful detour, I decided to try the aging filter next. As I watched the app work its digital magic, I anticipated laughter, perhaps a sense of reassurance in the inevitable process of growing older. However, when the altered image appeared on screen, my breath caught in my throat. The face staring back was not the gentle, weathered version I had expected. Instead, it was a visage marred by something I couldn't quite place, an expression that seemed to harbor secrets or regrets that clawed at the edges of its eyes, pulling them into shadow. I dismissed the unease as a trick of the light, a quirk of the app's rendering. Yet, as I continued to experiment with other filters, a pattern emerged. Each altered version of my face carried a hint of that same unsettling demeanor, a subtle malevolence that seeped through the pixels. The transformations left me with a sense of being watched, as if the images were somehow aware. The rain persisted into the night, and I found myself unable to shake the image from my mind. It lurked there, amidst the everyday thoughts, an uninvited guest at the table of my consciousness. I tried to rationalize it, to explain away the creeping sensation that something fundamental had shifted. Perhaps it was merely the app's way of making its outputs more dramatic, a feature designed to evoke emotion. But doubt bloomed in the crevices of my certainty. What if this was more than a simple quirk of algorithmic creativity? What if the technology had glimpsed something within me that I was too blind to see myself? As days passed, I became more engrossed in these speculative thoughts. I revisited the app, experimenting with various photos, trying to replicate the results. Each time, the transformations bore that same unnerving signature. It was as if the app was peeling back layers, exposing raw nerves and hidden truths beneath the surface of my skin. The unease gnawed at me, an itch that wouldn't be scratched. The images were no longer mere curiosities. They had become stark reminders that something was amiss. In the quiet of the night, with only the rain and the hum of my laptop for company, I began to investigate more deeply, scouring forums and user reviews for similar experiences. Buried amidst the enthusiastic endorsements and casual complaints, I found a thread that mirrored my own growing suspicion. A handful of users spoke of experiences eerily akin to mine. They described transformations that transcended mere visual alteration, hinting instead at darker revelations and unexpected insights into their own lives. One post in particular stood out, a detailed account of a man who claimed the app had revealed a family secret long buried, its shadow manifest in the altered images. The user, anonymous but articulate, recounted how the app had consistently rendered his face with an expression of deep sorrow and a peculiar birthmark he'd never seen before. Intrigued and disturbed, he had pursued the anomaly, only to uncover a truth about his lineage that had been obscured by years of silence. The post concluded with a warning, urging others to approach the app with caution, for it could reveal more than just playful distortions. The seed of doubt sown, I found myself drawn deeper into this digital abyss. Every night, as the rain continued its melancholic serenade, I revisited the app, pushing its filters to their limits, seeking answers within the distorted echoes of my own reflection. Sleep became a distant memory, my thoughts tethered to the images that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Then, one evening, while experimenting with a particularly vivid filter that promised to reveal one's deepest fear, the app froze. My breath hitched in my throat, the screen flickering before settling on an image that chilled me to the bone. It was my face, yet not my face. The eyes were hollow, dark voids that stared back with an intensity that pierced through the screen. My skin appeared cracked, like parched earth, and my mouth twisted into a smile that spoke of madness, a grin that suggested secrets too terrible to bear. A shiver ran down my spine, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to delete the app, to banish it from my life and reclaim my peace of mind. But before I could act, the power flickered. The room plunged into darkness, the only sound the increasingly torrential rain drumming against the windows with newfound ferocity. In the pitch black of my apartment, I sat frozen. The image burned into my memory. I could feel its presence, as if it had stepped out of the screen and into the shadows around me. My heart pounded in my chest, an erratic rhythm that matched the chaotic storm outside. I fumbled for my phone, using its meager glow to navigate to the circuit breaker. The lights flickered back to life, banishing the shadows, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. In the days that followed, I avoided the app, but the damage was done. The image remained with me, a specter haunting the periphery of my vision. It lingered at the edge of mirrors, flickered in the reflections of rain-dappled glass, and appeared in the briefest of moments when sleep eluded me and dreams turned to nightmares. Friends noticed my distraction, the way my thoughts seemed to drift, tethered to a world they couldn't perceive. I brushed off their concerns with a forced smile, unwilling to share the madness that had taken root within me. Yet, deep down, I knew I was not alone, knew that others had glimpsed similar darkness when they dared to peer beyond the surface of their own reflections. The app remained on my phone, a reminder of my folly, though its icon was buried beneath a sea of other distractions. I could not bring myself to open it again, to risk confronting the truths it might reveal. Instead, I carried the haunting image with me, a perpetual reminder of the hidden facets of my own soul, a reflection not just of what I was, but of what I might yet become. The rain continues its eternal dance against my window, a familiar rhythm that once brought comfort, but now only serves to remind me of the night I glimpsed into the abyss. And as I sit here, pen in hand, transcribing these thoughts with a steady hand, I can't help but wonder how many others have shared my fate. How many have looked into the digital mirror and seen not just a stranger, but an unsettling truth waiting to be discovered. And so, the fear lingers, a vague, unshakable dread that even now, as I lay down my pen, whispers to me from the shadows. It is the fear that somewhere in the depths of our reflections lies something unknowable, something that watches and waits, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when we dare to look too deeply. It began on a quiet Thursday evening, one of those deceptively ordinary nights when the world seems perfectly aligned, each second ticking by methodically as the hands of the clock shuffled through time's inconspicuous march. The dull hum of my computer provided the soundtrack to my routine, a comforting reminder of the modern world's omnipresence. The glow from the screen cast a soft light across the room, illuminating the familiar clutter of books and scattered papers, remnants of a day spent buried in work. I had been sifting through emails, responding to a few, ignoring many, when a notification blinked into existence at the corner of my screen. It was from an unknown sender, a bland subject line that read, "Webcam software upgrade." Computer updates were usually a burden, an unwelcome necessity, but something about this notification piqued my curiosity. Perhaps it was the monotony of the day, or the subtle urge to distract myself from fatigue. Without much thought, I clicked on the attachment. The program installed swiftly, a smooth, automatic process. I remembered feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as the installation completed, as if completing a mundane task perfectly. The webcam flickered to life, its small blue light beaming to indicate its watchful gaze. My reflection appeared on the screen, a mirrored image that moved with me in real time. I chuckled to myself, amused by the notion of watching myself watch myself. For a while, I toyed with the settings, adjusting brightness, contrast, and all the trivial options available. It was an innocuous diversion, a pleasant distraction from the realities of an overworked day. As the evening slipped into night, I forgot about the new software, left the computer running, and retired to bed. That night, sleep did not come easily. My subconscious flitted through restless dreams that felt oddly tangible, dreams that clung to the edges of consciousness with stubborn persistence. I awoke several times, disoriented by the shadows that loomed large against my bedroom walls, cast by the pale moonlight seeping through the windows. The discomfort lingered with me, an unshakable sense of being watched. The next morning, I returned to my desk, bleary-eyed and still enveloped in a fog of half-remembered nightmares. The webcam software was open, its interface innocuous, a silent observer of my every move. I shrugged off the unsettled feeling that clung to me and resumed my routine. But as the day progressed, the shadows of the previous night returned to haunt me, and my discomfort grew. It began subtly. The first disturbance came as a flicker across the screen, a momentary glitch that, at first, I dismissed as a technical hiccup. But the flicker persisted, appearing at odd intervals, each instance more unsettling than the last. I began to notice peculiar discrepancies in my on-screen reflection. It was nothing overt at first, a slight delay in movement, a subtle distortion in my expression. But soon, the anomalies became undeniable. I watched in growing unease as my reflection occasionally moved independently, a minor gesture here, a fleeting glance there, actions I had not performed. It was as though the mirror image had a life of its own, a consciousness aware of my existence, yet detached from it. Rationality insisted it was a software flaw, a glitch in the code, easily explainable by logic and reason. Yet, an insidious whisper inside warned of something more, something beyond the realm of mere technology. Days passed, and the disturbances escalated. The reflection began to convey emotions that did not match my own. A smile would stretch across its lips, while mine remained passive, or a frown would crease its brow as I sat calm. The divergence between the two realities, the one I lived and the one displayed, grew profound, leaving me trapped in a vortex of doubt and paranoia. One evening, as I sat before the screen, an overwhelming sense of dread consumed me. I stared at the reflection, its eyes boring into mine with unsettling intent. In a moment of reckless curiosity, I decided to test its autonomy. I raised my hand slowly, watching as the reflected image followed the motion. But then, without warning, the image waved back at me. Not the brief wave I had performed, but a slow, deliberate gesture, accompanied by a chilling grin that spread across its face, an expression that held no warmth, only malice. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the screen, studying the apparition with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Who are you?" I whispered, half expecting a response. The reflection simply tilted its head, maintaining eye contact with a disconcerting intensity. The silence in the room was palpable, the air thick with a fear I could not articulate. The climax came one stormy night. Torrential rain lashed at the windows, thunder rumbled ominously in the distance, and flashes of lightning illuminated the darkened sky. In the dim glow of my computer screen, the reflection became more animated, more alive than ever before. It was as though a barrier had been broken, and the entity within the screen had grown bolder, more confident. I watched in horror as the reflection's surroundings began to change, morphing into a distorted version of my own room. The bookshelves warped, the furniture twisted into grotesque shapes, and the shadows deepened, taking on menacing forms. It was a nightmarish tableau, one that mirrored my worst fears, yet bore a haunting familiarity. The reflection stood, moving beyond the confines of the screen, and I found myself unable to look away. It approached the edge of its world, its hand reaching out towards the invisible boundary that separated us. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what was happening. It was trying to cross over, to step into my world. Desperate to break the connection, I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled with the pounding of my heart and the rush of blood in my ears. I sat there, trembling, struggling to comprehend the reality of what I had witnessed. In the days that followed, I could not bring myself to turn on the computer. It sat on my desk like an ominous relic, a reminder of the inexplicable events I had experienced. I sought answers, delving into research, searching for any explanation that could rationalize the bizarre occurrences. But the more I read, the deeper I fell into the labyrinth of supernatural speculation and digital lore, each theory more terrifying than the last. I learned of tales where technology served as a conduit for entities from beyond, where the digital realm acted as a bridge between worlds. But these were just stories, I told myself, myth and fantasy. Yet, the lingering fear in my heart told a different tale, one that defied logic and reason. Even now, as I sit in my study, I feel the presence of unseen eyes upon me, a constant reminder of that night. The webcam remains unplugged, a precaution against whatever might still lurk within its depths. I avoid reflections, fearful of seeing that twisted smile, that malevolent gaze, staring back at me from the other side of the glass. Normalcy has returned to my life, a fragile semblance of it at least. I go about my daily routines with an outward appearance of calm, yet the specter of that night haunts me still. Every unexpected noise, every shadow in the corner of my eye sends a shiver down my spine. Sleep eludes me, replaced by long hours of staring into the darkness, waiting for a whisper, a sign that the nightmare is not over. I am not sure if I will ever know peace again. The experience has left an indelible mark on my soul, an awareness that there are forces beyond our understanding, lurking in the periphery of our existence, waiting patiently to make their presence known. And so, I live with that knowledge, with the chilling understanding that some things are better left unexplored. Perhaps the true horror lies not in what we see, but in the shadows that linger, in the silence that follows, in the fear that takes root and grows. For the unknown is a powerful adversary, one that thrives in the fertile ground of the human mind. And as I sit here, in the stillness of the night, I cannot help but wonder if the reflection has truly faded, or if it waits, biding its time, for the moment when the veil between worlds grows thin once more. It began during an ordinary afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood where I spent most of my days tethered to the digital world. The sun was high, casting a warm, golden hue across the streets and homes that sat comfortably apart, each surrounded by carefully manicured lawns and white picket fences. Inside, life was calm and predictable, much like the flow of the seasons in our small town. I spent my time exploring the endless landscapes of the internet, a habit formed out of both curiosity and the comfort of solitude. It was an escape, a place where I could be anyone, talk to anyone, or simply observe without being seen. This was my world, a virtual expanse where I could slip away from the mundanities of real life. It was during one of these aimless digital wanderings that I first encountered Darren. His profile appeared innocuously enough in a forum dedicated to urban legends and the supernatural, an area of intrigue that had always piqued my interest. Darren was just a username, but his posts had a certain pull to them, a kind of magnetic allure that was hard to ignore. His messages spoke of things unseen, whispers in the dark, and shadows that danced just beyond the edge of perception. He wrote with a familiarity of fear, as though these supernatural elements were as real to him as the screen before me. At first, our interactions were simple exchanges, comments on threads, shared links to strange articles, and discussions about the validity of ghostly encounters. But as weeks passed, Darren and I began to communicate more directly, exchanging private messages that slowly transformed into long conversations. He was articulate, with an eerie depth to his knowledge about the paranormal, and yet there was a softness to his words, a sense of understanding that seemed to resonate with the unspoken parts of my own mind. Then came the first disturbance. It was subtle, a mere glitch in the tapestry of my digital experience. One evening, while scrolling through a conversation thread, a message appeared from Darren, cryptic and out of place. "Have you ever felt the shadows move, even when there's no one there?" I stared at the screen, a chill tracing its way down my spine. A part of me wanted to brush it off as just another probing question from a fellow enthusiast. But something about the timing, the cadence of his message, felt different. I responded cautiously, asking for clarification, hoping to steer our chat back toward the realm of theory and away from whatever unsettling place he seemed to be leading us. His reply came swiftly, almost as if he had been waiting for my response. "Sometimes they whisper, names you know, faces you recognize, but only if you listen closely." The unease settled over me like a fog, thick and cloying. Despite the warmth of the room, a shiver claimed my skin, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to find some unseen presence there in the dim light. But of course, there was nothing, just the familiar clutter of my life and the soft hum of the computer. I convinced myself it was nothing, an overactive imagination fed by too many late nights in front of the screen. Yet, the feeling lingered, a persistent itch in the back of my mind. Darren's conversations took on a new tone, a darker edge that seemed to blur the line between the digital and the physical. He spoke of doors left ajar, lights flickering without cause, and the sensation of being watched when alone. The escalation came unexpectedly, on a night when the world outside seemed swallowed by silence. I had settled into my usual spot, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across the room. Darren's message appeared with a suddenness that startled me, breaking the quiet with an urgency I couldn't ignore. "Have you noticed the mirrors?" he asked, his words hanging heavy in the air. Mirrors. I hadn't, not until that moment. But his question planted seeds of doubt that took root quickly. The mirrors in my home, once innocuous and part of the everyday tableau, seemed now to possess an eerie potential, a gateway to some other realm where shadows could slip through unnoticed. In the days that followed, I found myself avoiding them, conscious of their presence like never before. Darren's messages grew more insistent, urging me to pay attention, to see what lay beneath the surface of my reflection. And though I resisted, an inexplicable compulsion drove me to comply, to glance into those glassy depths and search for something I could not name. The climax arrived when I least expected it, in the dead of night, when the house was still and the world outside was a shadowy expanse. I awoke to the soft, insistent glow of the computer screen, Darren's latest message arriving unbidden, as though summoned by some unseen force. "Look closely," it read. "Can you see them now?" I hesitated, heart pounding in my chest. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with a tension I could not place. Slowly I rose from my bed, drawn toward the mirror that hung on the far wall, a simple, unadorned rectangle of glass that had suddenly taken on an ominous presence. With each step, my apprehension grew, a rising tide of dread that threatened to pull me under. I reached the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with wide eyes and a look of uncertainty that mirrored my own. For a long moment I stood there, transfixed by what should have been a familiar sight, but now seemed foreign and unsettling. And then I saw it. A flicker at the edge of perception, a shadow within a shadow, moving with a fluidity that defied explanation. It was there, in the depths of the glass, an amorphous darkness that shifted and writhed as though alive. My breath caught in my throat, and I fought the urge to turn away, to flee from the terrifying unknown that Darren had led me to confront. Yet, as the panic rose, something else stirred within me, a realization, a clarity that cut through the fear like a blade. Darren was not just a voice in the void, not merely a digital phantom tethered to the threads of my online existence. He was something more, something deeply entwined with the shadows that danced just beyond my sight. I stepped back, heart racing, the room spinning around me as the weight of my discovery settled in. The shadows had always been there, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal themselves. And Darren, whatever he was, had been the catalyst, the guide who had led me to their dark threshold. In the days that followed, the lingering fear became my constant companion, a whispering presence that shadowed my steps. The mirrors were covered, the screens turned off, but the sense of being watched never truly left. I couldn't shake the feeling, that the shadows had followed me from the depths of the digital realm, stepping through the boundaries of reality into the quiet corners of my life. Darren's messages ceased abruptly, leaving a void where his unsettling presence had once been. I searched for him in the familiar haunts of the internet, but it was as though he had never existed, a figment of my imagination conjured by the shadows themselves. Yet even in his absence, I could feel his influence, a subtle shift in the fabric of my world that could never be undone. Now, as I sit in the stillness of my home, I find myself drawn to the stories of others who have encountered similar phenomena, tales of imaginary friends and unseen forces that defy explanation. The shadows linger, always at the edge of my vision, a reminder of the door I opened and the darkness that waits beyond. I am left with a question that echoes in the silence. Was Darren ever real? Or was he merely the voice of the shadows, guiding me toward a truth I was never meant to understand? The answer remains elusive, hidden within the folds of my mind and the dim recesses of the mirror's reflection. A secret known only to the darkness itself. Jack's house was the sort of place that seemed to belong to another world, one where secrets could comfortably nestle within its nooks and crannies. The house stood atop a gentle hill, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a wrought iron gate that creaked as if it had tales of its own to tell. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to be associated with sugar daddies. Those were more often found in sleek city apartments or seaside villas. But Jack was anything but typical. I met Jack through a friend, or rather an acquaintance, at one of those awkward social gatherings where people pretend at sophistication. He was older, charming in the way a well-worn book is charming, with a wisdom that seemed to gleam from his eyes. Our arrangement was simple. He provided financial security, and I offered companionship. It was transactional, devoid of romance, yet underlined by a strange camaraderie that I hadn't anticipated. The tranquility of our arrangement was disturbed one overcast afternoon when Jack asked me for a favor. His voice was calm, its usual reassuring timbre undercut by an edge I hadn't heard before. "There's something I need you to do for me," he said, eyes fixed on the view beyond the French windows. "I need you to stay at the house while I'm away." It seemed simple enough. I often stayed over, but something about his request felt different, urgent, almost desperate. I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. But as the days wore on, and Jack's absence stretched longer than he had promised, the house began to change. The first disturbance was subtle, like the whisper of leaves on a windless day. I started noticing movements from the corner of my eye, fleeting shapes that vanished when I turned to look. Shadows elongated in unnatural ways, stretching across the rooms in the twilight hours when the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. The security system, which Jack had demonstrated with pride, occasionally beeped as if sensing invisible intruders. Each time, I scanned the monitors, but they showed only empty rooms and static serenity. Isolation settled into my bones as I roamed the corridors of the house. Jack had left no contact number, no means of reaching him, and the silence of the estate became a companion. I told myself that I was letting my imagination run wild, that the creaks and groans of the old house were nothing more than its natural symphony. But doubts lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One evening, as I was preparing to head to bed, the security system chimed loudly, its lights flashing a warning. Heart pounding in my chest, I rushed to the control room. The display showed movement in the East Wing, an area I rarely ventured into. The cameras flickered, caught in a digital stutter, before stabilizing on an image that sent chills down my spine. There, in the grainy footage, was a figure. It stood in the hallway, motionless, yet familiar. My breath caught as I realized it was me. Or at least, it looked like me, a perfect reflection, right down to the clothes I was wearing. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the figure remained, a silent specter in the electronic glow. Panic clawed at my chest as I tried to rationalize the impossibility. Doppelgangers were the stuff of folklore and fiction, not reality. Yet there it was, an eerie mimicry lingering like an unwanted reflection. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone to call the police. But what would I say? That I was being haunted by a version of myself? The absurdity of it all silenced me, and I did the only thing I could. I stayed vigilant, watching the monitors until my eyes burned and the figure melted into the shadows. The escalation came with nightfall, bringing with it a deeper sense of unease. Every corner of the house seemed to harbor secrets, and every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps following me. I found myself speaking aloud more often, as if my own voice could dispel the encroaching darkness. The figure on the monitors became a nightly occurrence, appearing and disappearing without pattern or reason. Each time it appeared, it seemed closer, its presence a constant threat to my sanity. Days turned into weeks, and I started to question my own identity. Was this some elaborate trick Jack was playing? A test of loyalty, or perhaps a punishment for some unspoken transgression? The thought chilled me, but I couldn't shake it. Desperation gnawed at me, and I began to explore the house more thoroughly, searching for answers in the dust-covered rooms and forgotten corners. It was during one of these explorations that I stumbled upon a hidden study, its door concealed by a faded tapestry. Inside, the room was lined with books and strange artifacts, relics of a life I realized I knew very little about. On a heavy oaken desk lay a journal, its pages filled with Jack's meticulous handwriting. Flipping through it, I discovered entries that spoke of a project, an experiment, he called it, searching for something he referred to as the shadow self. The words were dense and filled with philosophical musings, but one passage struck me. In every person, there exists a mirror, a shadow self. To meet one's doppelganger is to confront the deepest recesses of the soul. It read like a riddle, a cryptic explanation for the entity that haunted the halls. As the climax approached, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Jack's study became my sanctuary, the journal my scripture. I read it obsessively, seeking the key to dispel the apparition. Sleep was a rare mercy, and when it came, it was filled with dreams of mirrors and endless corridors. The security system's alarm woke me one night, its shrill cry piercing the stillness. I rushed to the monitors, dread pooling in my stomach. The figure was back, but this time it was different, more vivid, as if it had stepped out of the screen and into the world. I watched, transfixed, as it moved with deliberate grace through the east wing, tracing a path I had memorized through countless nights of observation. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I followed. The house seemed to breathe around me, its walls alive with unseen whispers. As I approached the east wing, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I found the figure standing in front of a mirror, its surface rippling like water. It turned to face me, and I was confronted with my own reflection, or the closest semblance of it. The face was mine, but the eyes held a depth of knowledge and understanding that I couldn't fathom. We stood there, mirror images of each other, as the world seemed to fall away. In that moment, time stretched, and the words from Jack's journal echoed in my mind. A confrontation with the self, a merging of realities. I reached out tentatively, fingers brushing the cold surface of the mirror. The figure mirrored my movements, its expression serene, almost sympathetic. There was a flash of light, a sensation of falling, and then I was alone, standing in the moonlit hallway, staring at my own bewildered face in the reflection. The next morning, I found a note on the study desk in Jack's handwriting, apologizing for the ordeal and assuring me it was necessary, though it left more questions than answers. True to his promise, he returned shortly thereafter, acting as though nothing had happened. I tried to press him for explanations, but his responses were evasive, dismissive. The lingering fear never truly faded. Even now, months later, I catch glimpses of movement in mirrors, fleeting reflections that vanish when I look too closely. Jack and I maintain our arrangement, but the dynamics have shifted, the boundaries of our roles blurred by the encounter. The house, with its grand rooms and shadowed corners, remains a place of mystery, a labyrinth of secrets that continues to hold me captive. The question of who or what I saw in the mirror remains unanswered, a silent specter that shadows my every step. And in the quiet moments, when the world slows and the solitude of the house presses in, I wonder if the real horror is the realization of how little separates me from the ghost in the glass. The summer of 1998 was shaping up to be unlike any other. Tomskog, a sleepy little town nestled in the green folds of Minnesota, was laced with a peculiar kind of warmth and ease, the kind that pulls you out of bed with a promise of adventure and joy. For me, it promised the same until the day I found the mirror. Our family house, a sprawling relic from the early 1900s, housed secrets in its wooden panels and whispers in its corridors. Despite the age, I always found the house reassuring, like an old, wise friend who had seen much but said little. That summer, my parents had taken a trip to Europe, leaving me to my own devices, with only a few neighbors and the occasional visit from relatives to keep me company. I relished the solitude, spending my days biking along the river, reading old novels in the hammock, and exploring the attics and basements of our home, a place I had known since childhood, but still held undiscovered territories. The mirror was discovered in the attic, covered in a thick layer of dust and shadows. It was an ornate thing, easily over 7 feet tall, with intricate floral carvings along its wooden frame, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see much of anymore. The early morning sun slanting through the attic windows caught the glass, sending shards of light dancing across the floorboards, drawing me closer. As I wiped away the dust, the reflection that stared back was mine, but it held a peculiar depth, as if the glass had more to say than I could comprehend at first glance. That was the first disturbance, subtle and almost dismissively commonplace, yet a seed was planted, growing roots I couldn't yet feel. At first, I thought little of it. A mirror was just a mirror, after all. But as days slipped into weeks, the reflection in the glass seemed to change. Slight differences that were easy to dismiss as tricks of light, or my imagination playing games with a summer-idled mind. Yet, once noticed, the irregularities grew with a relentless, anxious kind of consistency. My reflection often lingered a second too long, its eyes following me even after I stepped away. Sometimes it was the smallest things, a strand of hair out of place, the way the corner of my mouth twitched differently than I felt. Small things that added up to a mounting series of unnerving inconsistencies. The mirror became a guilty obsession. Every day, I would climb the attic stairs and stand before it, searching, scrutinizing. Each visit left me with an unshakable feeling of unease. The reflection was becoming more its own entity, a shadow of myself, shaped alike, yet fundamentally different. There was no logical explanation, nothing in the realm of reason that could account for the creeping sensation that I was being watched, followed by something that wore my skin, but was not me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I faced the mirror as usual. This time, the reflection did not move at all. I lifted my hand, and it remained still, eyes fixed on mine with a palpable intensity that screamed of sentience. I stumbled back, a cold fear prickling my skin as if I had been caught in a sudden icy wind. It was no longer my reflection. It was something else entirely. The escalation was swift, as if the realization had opened a floodgate. Nights became restless, haunted by dreams where I was trapped within the confines of the glass, screaming silently as the reflection, my double, walked freely in my world, speaking with my voice, living my life. The days, too, bore the weight of an unseen presence. Shadows became longer, deeper. The house, once a sanctuary, turned alien. Each creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind, a reminder of the duality I couldn't escape. My conversations with the neighbors became strained. I caught them glancing at me with eyes that held confusion, as if they were seeing something different from what they remembered. My aunt visited once, a brief pit stop on her way to a conference in Minneapolis. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing in a way that made my skin crawl, a look that said she saw through to something other than what I was presenting. "This house always had a strange vibe," she said, sipping her coffee, her gaze lingering on me longer than was comfortable. "You look tired. Maybe you should get out more." I nodded, but said nothing. The words stuck in my throat like thorns. The climax came on the hottest day of August. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, electricity humming just beneath the surface. I awoke with a start, certain I heard a voice, my voice, whispering my name. It was coming from the attic. I hesitated at the foot of the stairs, my heart a rapid drumbeat in my chest. With each step, the voice grew louder, clearer, until I was standing before the mirror once more. There in the glass, my reflection was waiting, patient and smug. It smiled a slow, deliberate smile that I did not feel. Then it spoke. The voice was mine, yet not mine, a distorted echo that sent shivers up my spine. "It's time," it said, the words wrapping around me with a chilling finality. I shook my head, stepping back. "This isn't real. You aren't real," I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection tilted its head, eyes dark with something beyond malice, something ancient and knowing. "Real is perception, dear one. You see what you want to see." I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me, the handle cold and unyielding under my grip. Panic surged through me, a desperate, wild thing. I pounded on the door, screamed for help, but the house swallowed the sound, leaving me alone with my silent tormentor. Hours, or perhaps mere minutes, passed as I struggled against the inevitable. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I sank to the floor, the wooden boards hard and unforgiving against my skin. The reflection watched, ever vigilant, a puppet master pulling invisible strings. Eventually I slept, a fitful, restless slumber where dreams and reality blurred until they were indistinguishable. When I awoke, the storm had broken, rain lashing against the attic windows, the air heavy with the scent of ozone. I was alone, the door ajar, the mirror still and silent, ordinary in its deceitful simplicity. The lingering fear did not dissipate with the morning light, though the reflection behaved normally once more. The damage was done. A fissure had formed in my perception of reality that could not be mended. I avoided the attic, the mirror, like a disease, an infection waiting to spread. Life resumed its normal cadence with the return of my parents. They noticed the changes in me, the quietness, the haunted look in my eyes, but attributed it to the solitude of the summer. I let them believe it, unable to articulate the horror that had become my companion. Yet, there were signs that it was not over. The neighbors continued to look at me with that same confusion, that same unsettling recognition of something other. My reflection would sometimes catch me off guard, its eyes meeting mine with an understanding that was too knowing, too aware. I moved out of the house the following summer, leaving Tomskog and its mirrored secrets behind. But the fear, once awakened, had taken root. In every reflective surface, I catch glimpses, fleeting, peripheral, that remind me of the summer without a face, a shadow that lingers just out of sight, watching, waiting. The mirror remains in the attic, covered now, but still there, biding its time. I sometimes think of it, wonder if it calls to another, whispers their name in the twilight hours. I wonder if they will listen. It was a quiet Sunday morning in the suburb of Willow Creek, where the gentle hum of everyday life masked the peculiarities that sometimes lurked behind closed doors. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of our modest home, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. The house was as it always had been, comfortably cluttered with the remnants of family life. Children's toys scattered in the living room, grocery lists pinned to the fridge, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen. The breakfast table was set with care, a routine that my wife Claire had maintained for years. Our two children, Lily and Ben, still in their pajamas, were engaged in a lively debate over who would win in a battle between a dinosaur and a robot. I watched them with the kind of indulgent smile that only a father could muster so early in the day, feeling the warmth of normalcy cocoon us. But then, an unsettling shift began to weave its way into our lives, subtle enough at first to be dismissed as quirks of imagination. It started with the mirror in the hall, a tall, elegant piece framed in dark wood that had stood there since before we moved in. Claire had an affinity for old things, and this mirror was no exception. On more than one occasion, I found myself catching a glimpse of something in it, a fleeting reflection that didn't quite match the movement of the room. It was as if the mirror harbored a secret, one that it was reluctant to share. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed something peculiar. As I adjusted my tie in front of the hall mirror, I saw Claire passing by in the reflection. Nothing unusual, except when I turned to greet her, she wasn't there. I shook it off, attributing it to early morning grogginess. Yet, the sensation of being watched lingered, like an itch that refused to be scratched. The days rolled on, but the disturbances grew harder to ignore. Claire began to mention similar experiences, albeit with a hint of jest to mask the underlying unease. She would laugh off the odd reflection that seemed to move independently in the mirror, or the sensation of someone standing just behind her. As for the children, they were blissfully unaware, engrossed in their world of homework, cartoons, and sibling rivalries. The escalation came subtly, like a storm cloud creeping over a sunny horizon. I found myself increasingly drawn to the mirror, an inexplicable urge that defied reason. It was as if the mirror and I were engaged in a silent dialogue, one that I couldn't understand, but felt compelled to pursue. Claire noticed my growing preoccupation and teased me about being vain, but there was no humor in her eyes. Then, one evening, as the children were tucked into bed and the house had settled into its nocturnal calm, I heard faint whispers emanating from the hall. They were so soft, they seemed almost imaginary. I followed the sound to the mirror, where the air was cooler and tinged with a scent I couldn't quite place. It was then that I saw it, my reflection, but not quite mine. The face was mine, but the eyes were different, colder, and there was a smirk that never touched my lips. I stepped closer, entranced and horrified, and the whispers grew more distinct, though I could not make out the words. It was as if the person in the mirror was trying to tell me something important, but the glass barrier rendered it incomprehensible. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the glass gave way, like the surface of a pond. Panicked, I withdrew my hand, breaking the spell. The mirror showed only my reflection once more, the strange visage gone. I retreated to the living room, where the familiar sounds of the television offered some semblance of normalcy. Claire was there, engrossed in a book, and I hesitated to tell her about what had happened. How could I, when I couldn't even explain it to myself? But the fear had already planted its roots, spreading through the house like an invisible vine. It affected Claire too, though she tried to hide it. She became quieter, more introspective, often staring into the distance, as if searching for something just beyond her reach. The children sensed the tension, their laughter more subdued, their games interrupted by glances over their shoulders. The climax came on a night when the wind howled through Willow Creek, rattling the windows and moaning through the eaves. I was in the study, sorting through bills and paperwork, when I heard the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Rushing to the source, I found Claire standing in the hallway, staring at the shattered remains of the mirror. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, and in her eyes, I saw a reflection of my own fear. "The mirror," she whispered. "It showed another me." We stood there in silence, the air heavy with the weight of our shared dread. The broken mirror lay in pieces, each shard reflecting fragmented images of us and the world around us. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In the days that followed, we tried to piece our lives back together, but the sense of unease never left. A new mirror replaced the old one, but it didn't carry the same weight, the same history. Yet, every now and then, in the corner of my eye, I could still see something, a flicker, a shadow, a face that wasn't quite mine. The fear lingered, a quiet specter in our lives. It haunted the corners of our minds, whispering in the silence, watching through the glass. And though we never spoke of it, the presence remained, a silent observer in our suburban home, leaving us to wonder if we were ever truly alone. The day began like any other in our suburban neighborhood, a place where the most thrilling event was typically the stop of the ice cream truck. I lived on Maple Street, a name so typically American, it seemed almost a parody of itself. Rows of similarly designed houses lined the street, each with well-maintained lawns and flower beds that gave the neighborhood a postcard-perfect look. It was a place where everyone knew each other, and yet, somehow, we all managed to keep our lives private. My neighbor, Mr. Wallace, was a peculiar man. He lived alone in a house that always seemed a little too dark, with curtains perpetually drawn. Despite his reclusive nature, he was polite enough, offering a nod or a wave when I crossed paths with him. The rumors about him were as abundant as the hedges that lined our properties. Some said he was an artist. Others believed he was an eccentric old man who had little regard for the mundane world around him. Yet, what I knew of him was limited to the occasional sighting when he stepped out to get his mail or tend to the garden. One morning, as I was heading out for my routine jog, I noticed something unusual on the sidewalk in front of Mr. Wallace's house. Drawn in white chalk were a series of intricate symbols. At first glance, they reminded me of mandalas, with their circular patterns and looping designs. But as I looked closer, I noticed that they were far more complex, interspersed with geometric shapes and lines of text in a language I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued. I paused for a moment, taking in the sight. The air around me felt different, as if the temperature had subtly shifted. There was an unsettling quiet, a pause in the usual chorus of morning birds and distant traffic. I shook off the feeling and continued with my jog, dismissing the symbols as a quirky art project by Mr. Wallace. Days passed, and the symbols remained, despite the occasional rain. They seemed untouched by the elements, as crisp and clear as the day they were first drawn. My curiosity grew, mingling with a sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. I began to notice odd occurrences in the neighborhood, shadows that lingered too long, whispers that seemed to follow me on my walks, though no one was around. Each night I struggled to fall asleep, my mind racing with irrational fears. One afternoon, returning from work, I spotted Mr. Wallace inspecting his chalk drawings. He knelt by the sidewalk, adding new details to the existing symbols. I decided to approach him, driven by a need to understand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wallace," I greeted, trying to sound casual. "That's quite the art project you have here. What do these symbols mean?" Mr. Wallace looked up, his eyes holding a depth that seemed to penetrate beyond the surface. "They're not just art," he replied, his voice calm, but laced with a seriousness that made my skin prickle. "They're protective sigils." "Protective?" I echoed, not quite understanding. He nodded. "They keep things out, things that don't belong in our world." I chuckled nervously, hoping he might elaborate. But he returned to his work without further explanation. The conversation left me unsettled, yet I couldn't bring myself to dismiss his words entirely. As the weeks unfolded, the disturbances escalated. I began to see glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, fleeting shadows that disappeared when I turned my head. Mirrors became a source of dread. Reflections seemed to hold something more, as though an unseen presence lingered just beyond the glass. Each time I passed a reflective surface, I felt an inexplicable urge to look away, fearing what I might see. One night, as I lay in bed, I awoke to a low hum resonating through the house. It was a sound that felt both foreign and familiar, vibrating through my bones. I got up, heart pounding, and followed the noise to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was the source, its surface shimmering with a faint light. I stood frozen, compelled to reach out and touch it. As my fingers brushed against the mirror, the glass rippled like water. A sudden force pulled me forward, and I stumbled through, finding myself in a world that mirrored my own, yet felt profoundly wrong. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Colors around me were muted, as though the life had been drained from them. I turned to see my reflection, but it wasn't mine. It was Mr. Wallace's. He stood where I should have been, watching me with an expression of urgency. "You shouldn't be here," his reflection said, though his lips didn't move. His voice echoed in my mind. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The mirror dimension," he replied, "a place that should remain untouched by the living." Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. How do I get back? "Focus," Mr. Wallace instructed. You must find the same spot in your reality and touch it. Hurry, before it notices you. Before what notices me? I questioned, my voice trembling. But his reflection faded, leaving me alone. I had no choice but to venture deeper into the mirror world. The landscape around me was eerily similar to my neighborhood, yet everything was wrong, twisted. Houses loomed at odd angles, and sidewalks wove in impossible patterns. It was as if I had stepped into a distorted painting, where nothing adhered to the rules of physics. As I navigated the surreal landscape, I felt a presence closing in. Shadows coalesced in the corners of my vision, whispering secrets that chilled my soul. I quickened my pace, searching desperately for anything familiar. The path seemed endless, each turn leading me deeper into the macabre version of my world. Finally, I spotted the unmistakable chalk symbols on a path ahead. Relief washed over me as I rushed forward, reaching for the spot where the symbols were drawn. But before I could touch it, the ground beneath me shifted, and I was pulled back, away from my escape. I spun around to face the presence that had been stalking me. It was a creature of shadows, a monstrous form that seemed to defy comprehension. Its eyes were empty voids, yet I felt its gaze pierce through me. I backed away, terror constricting my throat, and in that moment, Mr. Wallace's words echoed in my mind. Focus. Desperation lending me strength, I shut out the creature's presence and concentrated on the chalk symbols. I forced myself to remember each detail, the complex patterns and lines, willing the image to anchor me to my reality. The ground beneath me trembled, and I lunged forward, my hand meeting the cold surface of the sidewalk. Suddenly, I was back on Maple Street. I stumbled, breathless and disoriented, collapsing onto the pavement. The night air was crisp and real, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the mirror dimension. I glanced around, half expecting the shadows to follow, but the street was empty, silent. Mr. Wallace appeared by my side, helping me to my feet. His expression was one of understanding, mixed with a hint of sadness. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to find words to express the ordeal. "You must be careful," he continued. "Some things are better left unseen. These symbols, they keep the balance, but curiosity is a powerful force." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but a part of me understood the futility. There were dimensions to our world that defied logic, and now I was acutely aware of them. In the days that followed, I avoided mirrors, wary of their deceptive allure. The symbols on the sidewalk remained, now a constant reminder of the thin veil separating our reality from something far more sinister. Whenever I saw Mr. Wallace, we exchanged a nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared knowledge. Though life returned to its routine, a lingering fear hovered at the edges of my consciousness. I had glimpsed the shadows that lurked beyond, felt their gaze upon me, and knew that they were ever watchful, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their grasp. Every so often, when the night was particularly quiet, I found myself looking out the window, half expecting to see the reflection staring back at me, reminding me that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. The mirror world existed just beyond our sight, a parallel realm filled with dangers we could scarcely fathom, and I had been one of the few to trespass its boundaries. I often wondered what became of the shadow creature, whether it still lurked in the mirror dimension, waiting for another opportunity to break through. The thought kept me vigilant, always mindful of the reflections around me. And so, life continued on Maple Street, with its manicured lawns and quiet homes. To the world, nothing had changed, but for me, everything was different. I carried the weight of my experience silently, bearing the knowledge of a hidden world that lay just out of reach, forever haunted by the reflection that wasn't mine.